It's time for Should Christians Watch? A nun, a professor, and a TV writer discuss television from a Christian perspective.
We're going to talk about the whole freaking series.
Today's discussion, The Crown, Modern Family, and then 3 recommendations. So let's ask the question.
Should Christians watch?
The Crown is an original Netflix series. It's created and principally written by Peter Morgan, and it tells the fairly accurate historical story of the rise of Queen Elizabeth II of England, along with the world events that shaped the latter part of the 20th century. It's a brilliantly crafted drama that portrays Elizabeth as a young woman thrust into this position of power and influence while also carrying it with such great dignity and conviction, though somewhat emotionless. However, she shares her emotion with her sister Margaret, who lives a life of unhappiness, partly because of the Queen's influence. I mean, it's an intriguing period piece, and it is about somebody who's still alive. It is historical, however, there are liberties taken in the history. But it's so interesting because it's always interwoven with world events. I just think it is an intriguing... the royal family is always intriguing anyway, no matter where you're from, really. It's kind of fascinating that this kind of institution exists and still continues.
I really want to talk about the faith that's presented in this show. I tend to get a lot of emails and texts and Facebook messages from friends who say, have you seen this episode yet? Have you seen this episode yet? They have examined throughout the series the Queen's role as the head of the Church of England. There's a great episode, season 2, where Billy Graham comes to visit her, and this is apparently based on historical records of how fascinated she got with Billy Graham.
Reverend Graham, I asked you here today because there's something that I'd very much like to hear your views on.
Ma'am?
Forgiveness.
And there's another episode that everybody has been talking about this year about Prince Philip and his faith when he meets the astronauts from the first trip to the moon, wants to talk to them about greater things, kind of shows his faith journey.
It's interesting because that episode especially shows her as the Queen of England. She's head of the Church of England. She's a devout Christian and never really doubting her belief in God and that God has ordained her to take up this role that she's received. And yet it's kind of juxtaposed with Prince Philip, who's really into science and proof of belief. And it's interesting because he calls it like the stuffiness of religion. It's his disbelief is like really in opposition to the Queen's, like almost never questioning it. It is part of who she is. And I think that's a really interesting element in the show.
It's the kind of science-based and thought-based episode that perhaps a professor should watch and might really enjoy if he did.
Well, what I find interesting about all of that, I mean, first off, I think we could also maybe call it, at least this show, The Crown, is he's just not that into you. And the reason is because I don't disagree with anything that either of you have said about it. It's really well written. It's well acted. It's interesting for a lot of different reasons. I'm just not that into it. I feel like it's one that I should really like, but I think it's more the genre. And I think that's okay, right? Like, I think it's good to say it's a great show, but it's something that I didn't connect with, immediately.
I just want to speak in defense of British teledramas like this. A lot of people might be turned off that it's period, it's about the Queen, and think it's not for them. I think it's actually one of the best written shows on television right now.
So if I'm coming in this new, where should I start if I want to be all in on The Crown?
From the beginning, it is like historical, so it leads you in a chronological, story of the Queen. I would start for the first season.
I really agree with that. This thing is so well written. It really is chapter, beginning. You have to start at the beginning. But there is the Moondust episode from season 3 that's really interesting if you're looking for a point of entry. But also that Billy Graham episode from season 2 is worth watching just to see how the show portrays that character of faith.
Modern Family just ended its 11th and last season, just very recently. and it's been a long-running and really popular television show for a number of reasons. One, because it's just silly, quirky, filled with people that may or may not look like your own family members. But it's a modern family, meaning it doesn't hold to the traditional sort of vision of what a nuclear family is. And it is a silly sitcom that is mostly filled with some different punchlines and practical sort of jokes. But the primary conflict comes from the fact that it's a really diverse family. People that aren't connected by sort of biology, but instead represent a pretty wide swath of humanity. And I think that's actually one of the great strengths of the show, is that basically on every single episode at the end, one or a number of the characters come back to realizing that their primary commitment to each other isn't about the biological connection that they do or don't have, but instead it's their self-giving love for each other that binds them together as a family. And so it's not only funny, it's not only well written and enduring, I think, but at the same time, it gives us a picture of what it means to be a family in ways that may stretch some of the traditional notions of family that we have.
I agree, Cutter. The families in the show really express their love and support for one another throughout trials and struggles. In the end, whenever there is even a conflict, you'll see the parents love their children, and the kids see and respect their parents in return. And yet we cannot ignore, as Christians, we can't ignore that. Does it normalize the same-sex marriage? And yet I can ask the same question. There's also divorce and remarriage. So, let's ask these questions. But I know some people have had trouble with it, and they've told me this. And they think, am I condoning it by watching this show? And I said, no, you're not condoning it. You're learning, you're understanding people. You're not changing your own Christian beliefs when you're watching a TV show. It's not compromising on your own beliefs, but you're trying to understand what is going on in a culture. And perhaps what is happening maybe to some people So I think it causes us to look at more the humanity of the person.
Yeah, I agree, Nancy. I Christian viewers of the show are not going to see people that hold their same values in many cases. One of the, if we want to call it a downside, but one of the gaps is that there is virtually zero religion of any kind in the show. It doesn't really come up. And so that is one of the questions that a Christian might ask of why that's the case. But just like you said, as we go in and having watched this now, what are some of the opportunities that might come up for those of us who are Christians? And I think, while on that level of, do all the characters, for example, or do the writers hold to my same understanding of the world? The answer is no. But I do think on a sort of deeper level, that this notion of family is a very sort of Jesus-y kind of notion where, my family is not my brothers and sisters. It's those who share this commitment to self-giving love, to seeing those who are outside and those who are marginalized, the people that may not normally fit within my vision of family, that I welcome them in as a part of my family, and not in spite of our difference, but often in and through that very difference, which is really tough at times for us to do.
I have disliked this show since I first heard the title. And I honestly, when I hear it talked about like this, we have to be watching a different show. We'd have to watch it scene by scene. First of all, there's an arrogance in the title. Almost feels agenda-driven, modern family, as if you don't accept the family the way we're showing you, then you're wrong and then you're out of step somehow. But I actually find this show damaging to our culture. And it's not because of the same-sex marriage or the different ages of things. It's because of how the characters treat each other. First of all, the father was first presented as a goof. His big joke in the first episode is he thinks that WTF means why the face. So he's already shown as somebody who's goofy and foolish and doesn't really understand family or life. The kids are mean to each other. This is my big problem with nearly every family show on television, is the kids are mean to each other. I'm surprised, Sister Nancy, that you think that they show respect to each other. Maybe sometimes, but they say things to each other, and the husband and wife say things to each other that just shows this comedic persona. And I know these type of writers who think that's the way people get along. And I just think families are completely different. Okay, maybe it's showing a portion of this is how some families are, but why can't art be more idealistic and present things the way, in a more hopeful way. I'm not saying it has to be perfect. I just think that this kind of show encourages kids to be mean to each other and encourages families to be less than they could actually be.
That's a good point, Dean. That's a good point. I mean, I think it's true. There are elements, all that, where there is the struggles and stuff. But I guess I was looking at an overall, perspective. They all come together, and by the end, they're all hugging and loving each other. And, so, I mean, I guess, yes, there are elements of that.
I can argue, maybe we'll talk about it sometime, that there's actually a wholly Christian structure to most sitcoms, because you have to resolve conflict and you have to end at a point where you were at the beginning. So it actually is about conflict resolution and kindness and compassion, because you have to get back to where you were at the first episode.
I think that's why I do like it, Dean, is because of that. I think there is that underlying structure even here, right, in Modern Family. And it's very clear, and it's almost formulaic at times when you watch all 11 seasons. So maybe as a writer, you could critique it there too. I think that where I would differ is just that I do think, as Sister Nancy's going, I find the meanness of kids to be very reflective of life. I've got 3 kids, and that's
that's not my point.
Yeah,
that's
no,
not.
I know,
but it's
I
not
know,
reflective, because it's not reflective of my house, and I'm not that strict. I'm just saying that that's what television writers think is allowed. That there's nothing more valuable than the put down or the snarky comment or the meanness. And I'm sitting there going, why wasn't that kid just reprimanded? And again, I'm not talking about being strict. I'm just talking about being kind. Right. And so, it's funny.
I do think, though, over the course, if we went scene by scene or whatever, that they do emerge as very kind. I mean, the finale, anyway, the final season, especially the 3 kids, emerge as siblings, adult siblings that really do care and love for each other. They really are.
And would you want any of them in your class? Or living in your house?
Well, I mean, maybe, yeah. I mean, so it's similar to that Phil Dunphy, right? And I mean, all of them are flawed characters. I totally agree with you. And I think they're equally absurdist and flawed at times. But Phil Dunphy also is the instigating, the protagonist in a number of people's lives that actually I think they grow and change. The Jay Pritchett character, the patriarch of the whole family, he really develops in part because of Phil's sort of genuine, kind of dopey, committed love for his father-in-law. He just wants his dad to accept him. And over time, that changes the dad. And he's probably like the prototypical one that needs to change. But I just see over the course of the 11 seasons, the family as a whole grow and the characters grow in ways that I think you're right, that they start maybe as caricatures. My sense is over time, they actually develop into some pretty rich characters.
So we talked about Modern Family. I want to talk about a family show that I really do like. It's called The Goldbergs. It's been on ABC for 7 seasons. It looks like there'll be another season 8. It's also available on Hulu. It's a show set in the 80s about a kid who makes movies. It's really based on the guy who created the show, on his life, and it's his family. And the thing I like about it is they really do real conflict and real fights, but it's completely formulaic in that the third act is always them coming back together and apologizing and trying to do better and really kind of presenting good models for kindness and forgiveness and reconciliation. I also think it's really funny. The Goldbergs on ABC.
My recommendation this week is The Good Place, which just wrapped up its 4th and final season on NBC. You can find episodes on Hulu and or on Netflix. And I really like this show because, again, it's an absurdist sitcom that's silly and fun and entertaining. But it also probes some deeper questions, really about morality and how we often operate in terms of making moral judgments in life and what that might look like in the afterlife. So this week, I recommend The Good Place.
So my recommendation is 911. It's a series on Fox that follows the lives of Los Angeles first responders, showing their selfless call to service while also dealing with their own struggles and their own relationships. It centers on Captain Bob Nash, who's played by Peter Krause, who leaves behind his tragic and alcoholic past in Minnesota and is transferred to the Los Angeles Fire Department. A Catholic priest provides him support and guidance as he deals with his grief. It also stars Angela Bassett and Jennifer Love Hewitt, and what I like the most about the show is that it shows how first responders offer hope to people in crisis and find satisfaction in helping others. 911, the series, is on Fox on Monday nights, but it's also available on Hulu. Until next time, I'm the nun, Sister Nancy Usselman.
I'm the professor, Dr. Cutter Calloway.
And I'm the TV writer, Dean Batali, with no title in front of my name. This week I'm going to go with liberal arts degree earner.
Should